Welcome to this study. Today, we're taking a calm, analytical, and completely objective look at a truly fascinating and honestly deeply complex narrative that's been making the rounds online lately. We're going to deconstruct a very specific argument, one that attempts to stitch together earthly geopolitics, devastating ecological disasters, and ancient apocalyptic prophecies into one massive, overarching theory.
Now, just to be clear right up front, this entire presentation is a full summary of the claims made in a recent upload by a YouTube channel called Elijah and Moses. You can find a direct link to their original source right down below. Our goal today isn't to validate or debunk any of this, but rather to neutrally map out exactly how this channel constructs its argument step by step. So let's just dive right into their narrative.
Okay, let's start with the big central question this source poses to its audience. Is there a connection between nations politically condemning Israel and those very same nations suddenly experiencing unprecedented global wildfires? It's a pretty provocative hook, right? And it's the exact correlation the Elijah and Moses channel forcefully tries to draw throughout their whole narrative. Section 1. Geopolitics and Global Wildfires. So, according to the channel, there's a highly systematic map of cause and effect at play here. For instance, Spain officially recognized a Palestinian state, and allegedly, as a direct consequence of that specific political move, massive fires erupted near Madrid. Then you have France, which prohibited Israeli aircraft, resulting in mass wildfires shortly after. And Canada, well, they delivered a defiant UN speech and threatened airspace arrests, only to watch massive fires send choking smoke all the way down the continent to New York City. The source draws a straight line between these actions. They frame them not as tragic coincidences of nature, but as direct cause and effect. To anchor this whole theory, the channel heavily spotlights a quote from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. By focusing on his stark warning that he'll exact an immediate price for any diplomatic war, the source uses this political rhetoric as the foundational springboard for their speculative leap. The implication they're making here is clear. They're suggesting this price is actively being exacted against these nations through fire. Section 2. Diplomatic clashes and condemnations. The channel then pulls us back in time a bit to emphasize just how rapidly these international ties have deteriorated, specifically focusing on Spain. The source notes that historically, Spain avoided recognizing Israel under General Franco, and they only established diplomatic ties way later, in 1986. Fast forward to the war sparked by the October 7th Hamas attacks in 2023, and Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez emerges as a really vocal critic. By 2024, Spain officially recognized a Palestinian state. The source uses this timeline to illustrate a total rupture, leading to withdrawn ambassadors, and Israel famously removing Spain's representatives from the coordination center in Kiryat Gat. Next, the source stacks these geopolitical grievances alongside a coordinated narrative involving France and Canada, focusing really heavily on an airspace motif. The video notes France's increasingly hostile measures, things like explicitly prohibiting Israeli aircraft from using French airspace during operations with Iran and restricting Israeli participation in major defense exhibits. Meanwhile, Canada is cited for not only recognizing a Palestinian state, but for allegedly threatening to arrest Netanyahu if he ever crossed into their international airspace. The crucial takeaway here? The video establishes a very specific, deliberate list of politically hostile nations that have effectively blockaded or condemned Israel. Moving on to Section 3. Unprecedented blazes erupt. The source highlights a staggering number for us, 153,000. That represents the hectares burned in Spain this year alone. According to the video, this is a completely unprecedented scale. They note it's actually 6 times the area scorched by blazes in what the source cites as the first half of 2025. They use this massive statistic to really drill home the idea that these are absolutely not your ordinary seasonal fires. They're framing this as a severe ecological anomaly. And the scale of destruction described by the channel is truly apocalyptic. They point out that the Canadian fires didn't just burn local forests. They sent smoke so incredibly thick into the US that it literally swallowed the Statue of Liberty in New York. Across France and Spain, they note that more than 300,000 terrified people had to flee the expanding wildfires. In one highly specific example, they highlight a fire in Avila, west of Madrid, which scorched 50,000 hectares. To put that into perspective, the government stated that's an area 5 times the size of the entire city of Barcelona. To ground this vast, unimaginable macro-level destruction into deeply human terms, the video shares this emotional quote from David Gonzalez. He's a 48-year-old gardener who bravely used his own van to run supplies to firefighters in Avila. By showing the anger, the sheer helplessness, and specifically highlighting that phrase, something inhuman, the source actively uses raw emotion to fortify the gravity of its narrative. It subtly foreshadows the supernatural turn they are just about to take. Section 4. Allegations of intentional arson. To build their case, the channel begins piecing together highly localized, geographically isolated incidents to suggest a terrifying global pattern. They neutrally cite authorities investigating an Israeli tourist for a fire in Argentina's Islas Glaciares, and then they bring up reports of Israeli settlers attacking and burning 2 mosques in the West Bank. They stack this right alongside drone footage in California that supposedly captured someone intentionally setting wildfires, and an individual caught setting fires in Colorado. The video strings all of these disparate, widely separated events together to weave a narrative of a highly coordinated, deliberate effort. This all culminates in what we can basically call the retaliation hypothesis. The source explicitly claims that deliberate, widespread arson is a covert tool currently being used to aggressively punish the specific nations that dared to speak out against Israel politically. Again, remember, we are strictly summarizing the channel's assertions here, just mapping out exactly how they transition from political UN speeches to shocking allegations of a coordinated, fiery revenge campaign. Section 5. The Mystery Babylon Prophecy. Now, here is where the channel takes a massive, truly fascinating leap from modern earthly geopolitics straight into ancient theology. They introduce the concept of the Sanhedrin, but it's vital to note exactly how the source defines this body. They describe it as a 70 representative council, complete with a high priest, that is literally being built to eventually replace the United Nations building. They frame this religious council as the future governing authority of a rising, one-world global superpower. And that brings us to the grand, overarching conspiracy the channel is attempting to construct. They compare the current state of the world, where Western nations hold deep geopolitical power and frequently criticize Israel, with what they claim is an apocalyptic endgame goal. And that goal? Intentionally bringing down the entire West through these global fires to establish a revived monarchy, a false messiah, and a supreme one-world government that the video repeatedly refers to as Mystery Babylon. To anchor this massive theological claim to the real world, the source leans heavily on an alleged statement from 2 IDF soldiers, noting specifically that one of them is a rabbi. The video claims these soldiers openly stated it was their religious responsibility to punish the nations where they had been scattered. The channel uses this highly localized, specific quote to validate an exponentially grander conspiracy of global apocalyptic punishment. The channel then justifies this sprawling narrative of apocalyptic destruction by paraphrasing the ancient biblical book of Revelation. They state, "What she's done to these other nations, let it be done to her far worse." By invoking ancient prophecy and delivering it with serious weight, the source successfully elevates an earthly dispute over foreign policy into a divine, unavoidable apocalyptic judgment. Section 6. Summarizing the channel's claims. So, as we wrap up this full summary study of the Elijah and Moses video, we can see exactly how they constructed their argument, which leaves us with a fascinating and highly relevant final thought to consider. When you look at how seamlessly this video stitches together mundane UN speeches, tragically burning forests, and the book of Revelation, how do modern digital narratives successfully weave complex, real-world geopolitical tensions and tragic ecological disasters into such intricate, ancient, apocalyptic prophecies? It's a powerful reminder of how raw information is synthesized, warped, and framed online today. Thanks for joining me in this study.